Good evening and welcome to the Reading and Lehigh Railroad, a freelance line that is a what-if of a merger between the Reading Railroad and the Lehigh Valley in 1949. I've had a few questions about my layered scenicking technique, or what makes my contours a little more natural than the flat surface of my layout. And so using this small diagram here in the front of my layout, I'm going to show you exactly what I do. The first thing I do is put some debris down on the actual surface of the benchwork. What I use are cardboard scraps and small pieces of wood that I will then contour and layer up. Now, of course, Mother Nature is rarely square, so what I'll do is I'll put a little of my caulking on there to smooth that out. 1 second. Alright, now I've smoothed out things using my silicone paint. You'll notice it's not entirely smooth or even, but that's intentional. I don't want it to be too smooth because, well, the ground isn't smooth. I want undulation and ridges that look like they've formed naturally over time. Now this is N scale, so this is just really a generally flat area. We're just adding a little bit of a contour to the ground. Now the next thing I do is assemble all of my ground cover that I'm going to be utilizing. I have 4 different shades of green, ranging from my top layer to my more darker. I have sort of an olive, forest green, and then a very, very dark green, almost gray coloring of grass, as well as my dirt, and then my yellowish, I call it my dyeing shade. I don't know the exact color of it. Now, I also have a bunch of coarse ballast that I got when I was an inexperienced modeler that, since I'm using N scale, I have absolutely no use for. What I'm doing now is I'm going to put a little bit of that down that is going to allow me to use this up, but also help with the gradations on the ground that I'm attempting to make up. This is all going to be covered by the ground cover itself, so I'm just going to put some where I want to help smooth out my hills. So sometimes I'll put a little bit in a corner like that, which again will also help make the ground look a little more flowing. And if any of them don't get covered, then it really just looks like a rock on top of the grass, which we've all stubbed on those, our toes on those, or of course found them whenever we're trying to mow. So I'm using up this ballast that I really have absolutely no use for since I'm an N-scale modeler. So this is taking a page out of the budget model railroading. If you've got it, use it. Don't waste it. All right. So next, I'm going to do my ground cover. All right, so as very few lawns are perfectly manicured and have Kentucky bluegrass all over the place, I now use my brown. And I'll put a generous coating of that. Now, normally, as you can see here, I would actually paint a good bit of this, just a very weak green that I have, but it does help shade in things. You use a little bit less, I find anyway, I use a little bit less green when I do it like that. Now I will also use brown around my switches. Now this is just a preliminary coat here, of course, because I'm going to end up having to put a little bit more on once the sorry about that, once the ground cover is on, but now you're just getting to see. All right, so that is what the area looks like now with the brown applied. And I'm going to go ahead and move my beautiful Reading and Lehigh locomotive out of the way. All right, next we come to the various shades. I start with the darker first, my very dark green, and then I'll give, I wouldn't say a generous coating, but certainly a little more than you might expect, because this is going to be covered by our subsequent greens, but a little bit of it is going to shine through. I'm sorry, show through. And that sort of combination of the various grasses is what makes it look a little more realistic, I find. So again, I'm not coating everything, but I am making sure that every area, if you will, gets just a dash, some a little bit more, others. And don't worry about the clumps, at least I haven't, because it's all part of the greater mixing. All right, so now to our next little bit lighter green. Now this is going to be not full, but it is going to be more of a comprehensive coverage than I've done with any of the other colors so far. And that's because I'm using this as, well, for lack of a better word, my base. Another scoop. And if you do at this point get too big of a clump, you can always smooth that out if you want. I find that just doing the spoon tap measure method here gets it out enough of where I need it to be. I know there are some, I've seen a few people make really fabulous scenery shakers. I have not done that yet. So that's what it looks like now against the white top and the silicone. It kind of looks like just a dusting of snow. So I suppose that's something you could do in the future. All right, now I move up to my olive grass, or olive drab grass, if you will. I put a little bit of this on, but not nearly as much as you might think. Even though it is a little bit lighter of a color, I find that the color isn't fabulous for grass. So it's this color I use to really mix the grass, if you will, sort of mixing, bringing out the base. But, oh, sorry about that. Now, obviously, I'm trying to cover up a little bit more of the white at this point, but I want to avoid globs. But really, any of the major white areas are going to be taken over by the top layer that I use. All right, so that's what it looks like now, and let's move to the next layer. The last layer of the grass is this greenish turf that has a bunch of yellow flecks in it that almost look like sunflowers and whatnot. So here I want to be a lot more thorough with my grass, but at the same point, what I don't do, and what I'm finding I like the look of a little bit more, is I don't cover one area and then move on to the next one, if that makes sense. I try to put a little bit out, sort of reassess, and then go back and fill in the gaps. And I think the reason I do that is because if you do one area, you realize that you've covered up everything that's not that shade of green that you want. But that's exactly what we don't want. We want to see a difference in ground color. So I do this so that everything I change is going to show up over time as I do as I add each subsequent layer.